Welcome to the Westminster Tradition, where we unpack lessons for the public service. I'm Danielle Elston, Managing Director of Good Government Advisory and a recovering public servant. Today, I am joined by Georgia Heath, co-founder of Yup Yup Labs. Georgia has a background in regulatory reform, strategic planning, service transformation, urban planning, digital transformation, and public sector innovation. Through Yup Yup Labs, she works with organisations and community to improve services through human-centred design, technology, innovation and evidence. But the reason I invited Georgia here today is not just her professional biography. She's the reason I haven't thrown LinkedIn in the bin, because I've been really gripped by her reflections on LinkedIn about public services and disadvantages and who gets into the rooms where policy is made, and what systems miss when they don't properly understand the communities they're trying to serve. Georgia grew up in the northern suburbs of Adelaide, and her work now focuses strongly on women and girls, social change, community capability, and the idea that some of the best answers to social challenges are already sitting inside the communities. She is currently spending time in Mapoon in Western Cape, York, on Chunjunji land. And I have a bit of an affinity with that part of the world because my old man worked there for some time. He was technically doing native title and economic development work with Cape York Land Council, but he, depending on who he was talking to, would say he was really a talent scout for the Port Adelaide Football Club. So with that very big introduction, welcome to the Westminster Tradition, Georgia.
Thank you so much, Danielle. I'm so excited to be here.
We are so excited to have you. What's it like up in Mapoon today?
Absolutely beautiful. It is about 32 degrees, sunshiny, perfect swimming and cocktail weather, actually.
Oh, dry. It would be nice and dry as well. Not even that big build-up.
Absolutely. It's, pretty perfect up here.
It's one of the most gorgeous places in the world. It's a long way from Elizabeth is what I would say. Like from the desert and the dry, it's a long way to the rainforest.
It's a very long way to the rainforest, and you definitely leave the bitumen to get here. But in many ways, it's not that far either, if that makes sense. And I feel really at home here.
Yeah, interesting. I want to find out why you feel at home up there and what those similarities are. Public service talks a lot about lived experience, diversity and co-design, and I sometimes am a bit sneery. I think that's what Caroline calls me, sneery, when it comes to that kind of co-design piece. Your work seems to kind of push that conversation a lot further and asks what happens when people from disadvantaged communities aren't just kind of consulted in a consultation, but are actually treated as intellectually serious partners in designing services and writing policy and building technology. I want to talk to you about what the public service misses when it recruits too narrowly and designs from a really far away and mistakes polished kind of language for credibility. So if we're going to start with the perfection of Mapoon, can you tell us a bit about Mapoon and whose country? I'm not sure everyone else will know where it is. I think once you get past about Port Douglas, lots of people aren't sure what happens for the remaining 1,000 kilometres after that.
Absolutely.
So tell me about Mapoon and kind of what has it been like for your understanding of service delivery?
Yeah, so Mapoon is a beautiful community. It is up what's known as the PDR, or the Peninsula Development Road, which is largely bitumised now, but there's still about 160 kilometres that is still red dirt, red corrugations, and it is one of the most beautiful and pristine areas of Australia. Like, it is truly gorgeous. It is, of course, also the site of many pieces of really interesting court cases and public policy relating to the Cape York Peninsula. And, you know, the Wick decision is a decision that was about land not very far from here. Loads of the kids here have family members who are Wick. And it's a place where there is so much beauty and so much disadvantage that goes hand in hand. And I would say it's probably one of the places in Australia that has been the most impacted by government policies over the past 60 years or so. And it's a real moment for us to be thinking about, how do we do things better? At the same time, though, there's a whole load of things that happen that make me think we're getting some things right.
Yeah. I want to hear what we're getting right, but maybe firstly, like, it is the isolation of it, right? Like, as I said, most people, if you've gone to Port Douglas, think that the country stops about another 100 k's from there, and it doesn't. What does it show you? Like, what becomes obvious in the remoteness of a community that is invisible from like Canberra or Brisbane or Adelaide?
Yeah, so
I mean, setting this podcast up has been like okay, Georgia doesn't have internet again. Like, I'll have to wait a few weeks till her Starlink's like to get a response to an email. Like, it has felt crunchy getting this organised and reminded me of how much privilege I have. Just like the technological infrastructure privilege, where I'm like, okay, Georgia's disappeared off the email for a week. It must be some kind of infrastructure problem. She'll turn back up. Like, even just organising this up, I've been reminded of what remoteness.
Absolutely. And I think like when people ask me where I am, I say, well, have a look at Papua New Guinea and then just look a little bit further south, because that is where I am. You can get to Papua New Guinea in a tinny from here, and people do. Like, they go to they go into international waters in like little fishing boats. That's a thing that people can do and do and have been doing for thousands of years. So it's a completely different part of Australia to get your mind around. Some of the big things though, so yeah, infrastructure is a huge issue. And so like if there's a big storm, and we experienced a cyclone earlier this year, then our internet doesn't work. So we don't have internet that's brought to us in cables. Our internet is completely based off of satellites. And my understanding is that that's pretty recent too. So up until, we were able to get Starlink, and the NBN version of Starlink, there wasn't that internet connectivity, nor was there telephone connectivity. So when those big things happen, like a cyclone, we need to be really thinking through, like, what is the communication system going to be like? What happens if that one tower goes out? Does our radio work for us to be able to do the ABC emergency messages? So those basic telecommunications things that I think the rest of Australia takes for granted, it's really... It can be really hit and miss still today, that we would have reliable internet or reliable telecommunications, reliable radio. And it's really, as soon as I leave where I live, all of that drops out. So I carry a Starlink in my car at all times, but between here and the next town over, which is where the Woolworths is, I've got at least an hour and a half drive with no communications whatsoever. And I think where that becomes really important, so it's important in terms of work, and it's important in terms of being able to talk to family and those kinds of things. But of course, if you've got an emergency, whether it's an emergency like a cyclone or an emergency like, I've got a child who has anaphylaxis, how do you connect with those services? How do you get that emergency relief to be able to live safe and happy lives?
Yeah. Reminds me of two things. One is the exposure that these communities have to climate change, and that you're not getting a break between natural disasters. Like, I think on another episode I've talked about my loathsomeness of the word resilience, because sometimes it feels a little bit like suck it up, and just how the rolling series of disasters, like infrastructure isn't even getting a chance to be rebuilt in some communities, where you are, but also in the Territory, northern Western Australia, the north, and how much we maybe are not preparing for that becoming permanent, basically. But also, when you said a child with anaphylaxis, like I have dipped in and out of telehealth design services, and they do often assume in the kind of big picture thinking of like, how will we have FIFO medical professionals all over the country, and it's an expensive model, and there's always that look to see, well, do we really need to send all the specialists out, or can we do a telehealth instead? That's clearly not going to work 4 months of the year, really, right? Like, if you can't so much as get to Woolies with connection, how are you going to get a telehealth service up and about?
Yeah, absolutely. And telehealth is one that is hit and miss. So we've had that experience of using telehealth quite a bit since we've been here. And look, for the most part, Danielle, I have to say I'm really impressed with telehealth. Like, I think that there is some really good design that has gone into that means that healthcare is much more accessible. At the same time, though, it is going to be dependent on things like access to the internet, access to the doctors. It's still got the same pressures as any other health service. And so we do hear people talking about access to healthcare a lot, and particularly during that wet season, whether or not there is a quality of healthcare. And it is really hard. Like, one of the things that I keep thinking about here at the moment is actually dental care. So dental care is one of those
can't do that down the line, can you?
No, you can't. You can't do that down the line, and you really need somebody to be able to come and do it. And during that period when the road is closed, you can't. If you get a tooth abscess, you're not going to be going down that wet road. If the road is sometimes closed, you're not going to be doing that. So that then becomes an emergency, where something like getting a achy tooth looked at becomes maybe a helicopter ride.
Yeah, right.
Or maybe it's just having to put up with it.
And expensive, right? For government.
Really expensive. Yeah, really expensive. And that's where preventative health, I think, comes into it, because with, the greater focus on preventative health, then you stop those emergencies from happening. But at the same time, I'm talking about all of this and thinking about those challenges, and they are very real, particularly around things like healthcare. But at the same time, there are so many good things that are happening that are making it better and making it easier. And
what
I guess
are they?
That's where. So I would say, telehealth is one of those areas that we are seeing that connection. Like within the first couple of weeks of being here, I was able to go and have health reviews for my children that were high quality, that had good systems, good processes. One of the things that I experienced in actually when we were living in Mount Isa, but impacts across all of the remote communities like Doomadgee and Mornington Island, was the Aboriginal ear health team, the Deadly Ears team. That was fantastic. So what they've done there, so Aboriginal children are genetically more likely to have ear infections, which then lead to chronic disease and deafness. So what they've done with Deadly Ears is you can rock up at your local healthcare centre, your local hospital on, a Tuesday. They've got a full team of ENTs, of audiologists, of occupational therapists, speech therapists that you can go and see with your children, and they can get assessed, have all the testing, and if they need to, you can go the next day and get surgery.
Wow.
It was amazing. It was, I think, the best government service I've ever interacted with.
And makes so much sense. Like, you've already got people there, right? Like, the gap between services for lots of people, including in metro areas, it's the, am I still on the list? I've forgotten. They've posted me a letter. Like, just lots of that system requires a lot of hurry up and wait. And then when you're told, then it's like, now it's happening, but it might be many months or years later and you've forgotten what it is the doctor told you, or the idea of going, right, we're good to go today. That's like amazing.
Absolutely amazing. And my understanding is that they do it in some of those remote communities. So I think it's in Doomadgee, they have chairs. So they can get the kids can go in and get their tubes in their ears without having to go to a big centre, which is just a game changer. If we think about the educational outcomes of somewhere like Arakoon or Doomadgee, we are talking about some of the most disadvantaged communities in Australia. And ears, making sure that kids can hear, is one of the best things that I think we can do to try and improve their chances of living full, happy, long lives with good opportunities for work. And so, if a kid can hear, then they can learn to speak. If they can learn to speak, they can learn to read. If they can learn to read, they can learn anything they want. So it's one of the ways that we can give them the best chance of life, is just making it easier for them to get their ears clear, to be able to maintain their hearing for the rest of their life. And if we can do that in their own communities the next day, I mean, that's an amazing service.
That is an amazing service. You're making me remember some work done in low SES schools around eyesight, and how many of the year ones actually couldn't see the board at all. And a pilot that I don't know what happened to. If anyone does, get in touch. Around Flinders, I think it was Flinders, like optometry students, etc., like going out again, doing it at school, checking everyone's eyes. All right, you three can't see absolutely squat, so you're probably not learning very much. Prescription today, dropped back to the school like a few weeks later, and then kind of following. If anyone does know what happened to that, feel free to get in touch, actually, now that I think about it, because a bit of a similar thing, which is if you can't see, you can't learn. But lots of steps and cost to sometimes resolving that if you've got lots of kids or no transport, all of that kind of thing. So the in-place part of it, I think, again, we have all those kids were at school. Your kids are in community. These kids are in community. If you can go where they are instead of making everyone come to you, you can get stuff done much more quickly. But what do you think public servants should understand before they use phrases like kind of place-based or community-led or co-design?
So I think, first of all, that communities are not so different to the places that they live. Like, they live in communities. So one of the things that this might be a bit controversial, but I think particularly when we're talking about First Nations communities, there's a bit of a romanticising of that, there are these places and you'll go there and people are living these lives that are so very different to yours. And instead, my reality is that the kids are doing the same TikTok dances that my kids are doing. Like, so this idea that these people living in other places in Australia are so different to you is just fundamentally, flawed. There's going to be different realities around what service delivery looks like. There's going to be different realities around what each community, including in metropolitan areas, thinks is important. But, all kids are going to be wanting to do Lego. All kids are going to be wanting to, go and climb and play sport and do all those things that kids everywhere are going to want to do. And all their parents are going to be frustrated with the same things because kids are kids. So I think one of the barriers that we could really start to break down is understanding that no matter where you live in Australia, there's so much similarity.
Yeah. Although there are some differences, because you just revealed yourself very much to be a South Australian with your Lego there instead of your Lego.
Oh,
so
yeah,
you might
true.
You might be in FNQ now, but you can't take the Adelaide out of the girl, right? Like,
no. So my kids are learning rugby. I've got no idea what that is, like none whatsoever. And you were talking about your dad before with the Port Adelaide Football Club. So there are kids from here who have gone and played for Port Adelaide. We are a football family. Like, it's AFL. Rugby is something that I've never come across, and I hear that's a big thing here, but I don't understand it.
I married a Novocastrian, so I had to very quickly grip up the difference between league and union and all of this stuff. I'm with you. I'm still too South Australian and AFL to really get into it. I know I'm for the Blues when it comes to state of origin, but that's about it.
You're doing better than me.
One of the things you and I have talked about, and you talk a lot about pathways on your LinkedIn, which is that shift from older public service entry pathways to basically grad programs. Your mum entered the ATO through the old Commonwealth Public Service Admissions Test, and your aunt, I think, also moved into the ATO after working in factory and disability employment settings. What did those previous pathways that we don't have anymore make possible for people?
So my mum went to Elizabeth High, and after she finished school, she did the public sector admissions test, and she did really well. So she could have her choice of many public sector roles. Before
she chose the tax office. Like, I don't want to rag on your mum, but it wouldn't have been my first choice.
No, mum really liked maths. I'm going to put it down to that. No, it wouldn't have been my first choice, but saying that, I've got huge numbers of people in my family that have worked for the ATO, and actually I applied for a job in the ATO and they told me no. So state government it was. But yeah, I think for mum, so her first job was actually at weapons research before I was born, and so she was going out and doing some really interesting things there. She was in largely an administrative role, and then after I was born, she moved across to the tax office. And in the tax office, I mean, she started off doing the inquiries. So down on Weymouth Street, you could go in and you could ask your questions. This was in the 90s, so it was all very paper-based. We didn't have e-tax yet. So she was doing that. And then an opportunity came up for her to actually work at the Elizabeth ATO. So that was much closer to home. And my mum, single mother, having 2 kids who were quite little, being able to work in Elizabeth at the tax office was a really good opportunity for her to be able to get a better work-life balance, to be able to be home in time to get dinner on the table. It really was a bit of a game changer in terms of managing work and life for mum. And then when we got a bit older, a bit more independent, she started doing other things. So she ended up managing tax help for a while. And when I was at high school, so mum was going out and talking to high school students about taxes all across South Australia. And so when I got to high school, she used to have tax parties at my house. And so all of my friends...
Oh my God. Nerd siren. I need my nerd siren,
nerdy.
Adam.
And this is like happening in the northern suburbs of Adelaide, right? This is not the thing you think about when you think northern suburbs. But all my friends would come over, they would bring snacks, and we would all get our taxes done. And then as I got even older, mum ended up going and working on e-tax. So she worked on digitising taxation so that it was much more accessible. So that was really the environment that I grew up in. And I think that process, mum did try to go to uni when I was in primary school. So she did go and do some study at uni. But for the majority of what mum did, it was about having really good communication skills, really good ability to be able to work things through, good public sector management skills. And that was something that she very much acquired on the job. So that public sector pathway through the admissions test, I think, was really important for somebody like my mum being able to go and get in. And similarly, my auntie, and I've had several aunties that ended up working at the tax office, but for my auntie that had come from that factory background, she was a really good people manager. And so she had been able to practice those skills whilst working at Hardy's on the production line. Yeah. And then she ended up going and working as a manager, like a production manager at Bedford Industries. So she had been working with people with disabilities. She used to, in the school holidays, if they had too much work, she would subcontract to us kids. So she would pay us in chocolate frogs, and she would bring home projects, and we would set up production lines in our lounge room, again in Salisbury, in the middle of the northern suburbs, doing production lines and learning these principles of good process design.
Wow.
By sticking stickers on badges or one of the jobs we had to screw lids onto sample bottles. And then we'd have to weigh them. So we had quality control going on in the lounge room of my auntie's house. And then she ends up at the tax office as well. So she brings all of these principles from manufacturing and being able to understand how to work with people with disabilities, being able to work with production processes into the public sector. And I think there's a lot that I've drawn on in my own work where I think about those processes. Like I love nothing more than getting a good process redesign going. And I think it's because of that experience of, sitting there in the lounge room, screwing lids on and weighing things and just making sure that we get it as efficient as possible.
I'm not sure that in a world of the selection criteria and how writing heavy applying to be a public servant is, that like what you've just described, it makes perfect sense, but I'm not entirely sure that for the person on the factory line in trying to lift that up to being, I am a process redesign, blah, blah, job application, and then also the person reading it being able to see the connection in skills. I wonder how easy it would be for your aunt to get that job today, the job that she in the ATO. And not having got the ATO, but just or any similar job at where you can make the connection between really different types of non-public sector work and be able to see the kind of the skills that are really valuable in that.
And I think, one of the things that's happened over the past 30 years or so is this increasing emphasis of the degree. And, I'm very supportive of degrees. I think they really have an important role. But I would say that not every role needs one. And not every skill you're going to learn through a university setting. So, I do think that we are increasingly looking at that as a marker of some kind of sign of competence. But actually, when we do that, we then exclude a whole heap of people who have these really great transferable skills that make our public services better. And so I would hesitate.
And university graduation rates, the patterns of them haven't changed a great deal over a long period of time. So, for instance, university graduation rates in the northern suburbs of Adelaide remain really low. So what does that mean for who is in the rooms making decisions? I mean, you don't start making decisions as a public servant. I've, got a few grads that around and they did think, bless their cotton socks, that they were leaving uni to make decisions, and they've discovered that what they're actually doing is taking minutes and making folders. But they will eventually make decisions if they move up through the ranks. And so what does it mean that we don't have them in the decision making, do you think?
So when I think about the impact of this, for me, a big one is the stereotypes that start to creep in. Yeah. So, my mum and my auntie both went to Elizabeth High. The graduation rates for people in Elizabeth for university remains at 7% or less. So the chances of them going to university are really, really low to begin with. And I know that my mum and my auntie have made really great contributions to public sector work over a long time. I know that I have. But I think that when we don't have these pathways, the very real consequence is that the conversation changes. So I know that when I've been in public service rooms and at public service tables, people will talk about them. They'll talk about, so there's an us, public servants, and a them or clients. They're citizens.
Yeah.
They're citizens.
I hate clients. Citizens. Where did that go? I hate it.
Yeah, absolutely. And the reality then is that we have all these assumptions about how people do things and about the competencies that people have. My pet hate, the one that makes me kind of get a bit stabby, is when people say their parents just have no ambition. And I just
Tell me about that.
Yeah, so I've heard this a number of times throughout my career that, their parents just have no ambition. They're particularly talking about in a school setting, but this idea that there's no kind of hope or there's no aim for people to have better lives. And I don't think I've ever met a parent that has not had some kind of wish or hope that their children will have a good life. I think that all parents have a really big desire that their children will have a better life than they did and that their children will be happy and successful in whatever that looks like. Yep. And certainly for me, I was growing up in an environment where I didn't know that this is what people thought about my community. I had no idea. I was just happily living my life, playing with my friends and thinking that I was going to go to university and that I might go and do something like medicine or law. That's where I was at. Yep. I had no idea that people thought that my mother, who was working full-time in the public sector, raising her children with ambitions to go to university, had no ambitions for her children. And so when I hear those kinds of things, I think, okay, well, who is in the room? What do they understand about my community? And then when it rolls out into policy development, one of the things that I struggle with is things like when we talk about programs always having to be free, or when we talk about always needing transport, there's this idea that there's no, or it comes across as there being an idea that there's no resilience within communities, so there's no capacity within communities to do things. Yeah. And, one of the things that is true for me, having grown up in the northern suburbs, is that there's a great deal of community care. So if a kid needs to get somewhere, people will help out and make sure that happens. Yeah. If somebody doesn't have soccer boots, they will, see who's got soccer boots for that child. There's this real community care that I know to be true, but it doesn't come through when I'm hearing people talk about the community that I grew up in. And I think it's that process of othering that then becomes quite harmful when we start talking about really big policy areas like, for example, job seekers. So if we have this idea that they have no ambition, that they have no capacity, then when we design programs like a job seeker program, unfortunately, that kind of bias starts to come in and we see people treated in a way that I think is probably not consistent with how we would want people treated if we saw everyone as equal.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm interested in then that job seeker part, but particularly what that then means. So if we have designed on the assumption of lack of ambition, and what is it that we then funnel people in to be doing? But before we leave the kind of public sector part of it, I don't believe anyone intends to exclude people. I think lots of effort with not necessarily impact, but effort has gone into recruitment kind of diversity. But I don't see that. We don't count class, firstly, so we don't have any data that I'm aware of. Again, someone get in touch if I'm wrong, because I've been looking for years on like first in family, like so class basically. So when we recruit, we do diversity and disability. So we do kind of cultural and ability, but we don't really know how many new recruits to the public service are the first in their family to work in the public service or to have a degree. And so we don't even know, we can't even measure whether we're doing a good job or not. How do you think that class, place, schooling show up in public sector recruitment? Even as when there's people are not intending to exclude, but do we create like markers that are actually inherently only for the middle class? That's the door?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, the university degree is definitely one of those. I think that's got a big role to play. I think that when we are designing those roles, one of the things that I'm just reflecting on my family, the two people I've described were both single mothers. So when we're thinking about things like workplace flexibility, that's an important part of those conversations. So if we're expecting people to be in a city-based office from, 9 to 5 or earlier, we've got to understand what that process looks like for somebody who might be living in, say, Elizabeth, who's got to get kids to school and who's got to then be able to get themselves to a meeting in the city at 9 a.m. And understanding how those broader policies then impact on people's ability to do them, I think is a big part of that. Yeah. At the same time, I think the public sector has a lot of strength in that it is good with flexibility and it is good with having the ability to have part-time roles, etc. So it comes from a good place to be able to really start to seek out those opportunities that can be more inclusive. One of the things I struggle with is people assume that Elizabeth is not that far or that Cape York is not that far. And actually, it takes a long time to get there, particularly if you're going on public transport. Yep. At the same time, technology allows us to make those places much faster.
Closer. I talked
So I talked before about my mother working at the Elizabeth
office
ATO.
And it being this big game changer, like big change to the family.
Absolutely. And I know we've had processes in the past where government will look at putting their service delivery into outer suburbia or into regions. And the reality with technology today is that we actually can be doing that without having to have physical buildings. So, we can be providing opportunities for people who are living further out, who might not find it as easy to be able to get into a city-based location, or who through geography are in places like Marpoon, to be a part of that public sector team. And we don't have to have the big building anymore.
Yeah. But it's not just the door in, right? Like recruitment's one thing, but there's also like if you don't have a degree, the way in is often those kind of often bulk recruitments at service level roles, like handing out driver's licenses or processing tax returns or like I sometimes like the widget, the counting, the mass parts of the public service. And then it seems to me like you weren't 30 years ago. There are some excellent senior leaders who came in through kind of processing work, but I don't see anymore lots of people moving from those kind of customer service or processing into leadership and policy rooms. What do we need to do? Like how do we do something about that?
So I think those processing roles are really good opportunities for people to get a really good start and to get a really good solid foundation to be able to build their lives upon. Yeah. I think that being able to give people an opportunity to then transfer into other, say policy areas of the public sector or into leadership and management roles, then it does two things. One is it gives people an opportunity to be able to grow their own work and to be able to bring their skills and experience in to really benefit the all of us as citizens, as taxpayers, by having better quality policy.
Yeah.
The other thing, though, is it brings that experience from frontline service delivery into the policy role. And, this is so important. If we need to have that expertise from the people who are on the lines processing the driver's licenses and, the people who, the fines enforcement unit, you want them to design better policies around fines because they're the ones who have that data, that rich data, to be able to make us get policies that are going to be better for everybody.
Yep. I completely agree. And they are more likely then as the leader when they're signing off on a big package of work to go, hang on, before I do it, could I just fill out the form, the online thing? Could I try it? And also not just the public service side of it, the dealing with human complexity. Like if you have been in those customer service processing parts of the public service, you know that like every second person has a really complicated kind of story as to why they let their license lapse or what kind of assistance they need. And you take that with you through the rest of your work. Whereas if you have not ever, and they're government services, right? Like customer service at Woolies is one thing. And you see a lot of human complexity there. But the services we run in government are like there's nowhere else to take your business, right? No one else is handing out driver's licenses. No one else is doing income support. No one else is doing free primary education or public primary education. And so like your experience in the fact that your life, my life as it's organised today is one way to organise a life and there are lots of other different ones. If you have had that experience, it never, ever leaves you, all the stories that you heard.
Yeah, absolutely. And it is, when I think back on my own career, I can picture those conversations. I can see those moments of people who have absolutely shifted how I view the world and how I shift my thinking around what the role of government is.
Yeah.
And that's incredibly powerful. And I think, I actually think that it would benefit the majority of people working in the public sector to have that experience of working on the front line. I also think there would be real benefit in getting people to have the experience that I'm having at the moment of living in remote communities, living in places that are so very different. I feel like this opportunity that I've got is opening up my eyes in ways that I never, ever knew needed to be opened. And I'm really looking forward to, obviously I'm having a great time here. I've got no plans of leaving anytime soon. But at some point, I want to bring what I've learned back to the broader public sector and to be able to share the things that I think are going to make a real difference in terms of how we deliver services, not just in remote communities, but in all communities.
Yeah. You've also talked about growing up in really multicultural communities and then finding yourself in public sector offices that were overwhelmingly white. What was that like to notice? Like that it just didn't feel like your street. So your street looked like one thing. You get this job, you look around and you're like, gee, it looks really different to my street. What was it like?
It was really horrible. I'm not going to lie. So it was a bit like a boiling frog. Like I didn't realize until all of a sudden I'm like, there are a whole heap of white people around me. This is different. So my community has always been multicultural. Like when I go back and look at the photographs of my primary school, I grew up with a whole heap of Aboriginal kids. I grew up with a whole heap of kids who were from migrants after the Second World War.
Yeah.
And then there were a whole heap of kids who had come over as refugees from places like Cambodia and Vietnam. And so my community was always really multicultural. And then I went to uni and uni was still really multicultural. I had people all around me from all sorts of places in the world. But then I entered the public sector and over time, I realised that they weren't there. It was the absence of people. You might have found people in sort of administrative roles, but certainly not in the policy teams that I was in. And I don't think it was intentional, Danielle. Like I don't think anybody intentionally set out to do that.
No, there's hurdles and gates that we get to a point where you can't get over enough of them. You can't speak the way you is the kind of lingo of the public service. You don't present the way that is the public service kind of professional stream. There's just all these kind of unwritten hurdles that changes who's in the room.
Absolutely. And I think the impact that I found, and I'm like remembering I'm a white person, and I eventually got to the point where I felt that it was so foreign to me that I couldn't stay. So it did get to the point where it was so inconsistent with my values. It was
Yeah.
so inconsistent with my understanding of how the world was in my community
Yeah.
that eventually I became so uncomfortable I couldn't stay. And if I became that uncomfortable as somebody who is very much a white person, I can only begin to imagine what it feels like if I was a person of colour.
Yeah. Yeah. Let's jump to that, because you've got strong views on job services and have done so much work in this. And you describe working with women who were long-term unemployed, highly capable, but really poorly served by job services. Tell me what you saw then, what you were seeing, and what did that tell you about how systems were like reading and kind of categorizing people, I suppose.
Yeah, so this is a bit of a wild one. So what happened was I didn't intentionally set out to go and do this work. It came upon me by accident and was almost a case of once I'd seen it, I couldn't unsee it and I had to do something. So around the same time, there were two things happening in my life. One was that I was running a program for young people that was looking at, they came to us and they said that they wanted to reach for the stars, that all of the people, all the adults in their life were putting a lid on their ambition and they wanted to be able to reach for the stars. Yeah. And so we said, no worries, we will help you with that. So we started running an after school program out in the northern suburbs in Adelaide. We were taking them to universities in the school holidays so that they could have a think
See
about
what
whether
it
they
looked
liked
like.
that.
Yep.
That's right. Some of them wanted to be chefs, so we were running a cooking program. Like, we were really saying, yep, no worries. And this was based on research that had been done in Playford that
Yep.
was showing that the things that were making success for people who had grown up in Playford were participation in arts, volunteering, sport, and having one person to believe in you. So we thought, we'll be that one person to believe in you. So we're running that program. And one of the people running that program with us was a woman who I had actually gone to high school with. And so she was a mother of one of the people in the program. And she she and I were both bullied by the same mean girls at school. Like, you can imagine
Totally.
Yes. So we were both bullied by the same
Are
group
you telling
of
me
mean
you
girls.
weren't cool? Were you not cool at school? Were you a bit weird?
I was definitely weird. I loved being weird. I was a drama kid. And I was on the debate team. I was a drama kid. And I was cool for my, I thought
Your
I was
own
cool.
little. Yeah.
Yes. But there were some very mean girls. So anyway, going on however many years later, we'd lost touch. And I had gone and done the things that I had done, but through Facebook, we were able to reconnect. And I think pre-Facebook, I probably wouldn't have reconnected with some of the people I went to school with. Like, our lives were so very different. But Facebook comes along, we reconnect, and we catch up to, where are things up to in her life 15 years on. So she's got children. One of the children is in this program. She had experienced really horrific domestic violence. She had experienced she had tried to get her education for about 10 years after she finished school. She had continued to do courses whilst she had all these small children, and she had been volunteering. So she had been going out running kitchen garden programs, working on a whole heap of programs around the Peachy area, trying to improve things for other young people. But she'd never really been able to get much work. And so she had started her own business, and she was making gift products for people and doing printing. And it was so cool. She had taken her payout that she received from victims of crime for the domestic violence that she had experienced, and she had bought commercial printing equipment. So she had the capacity to run a commercial printer from her house. That was her way of taking ownership of the violence that had happened. Anyway, she was working with us on this program as a parent, and we'd been working together for over a year by this stage. And we knew how reliable she was. We knew that she was always turning up, that she was always going above and beyond, that she was doing the prep work to make sure the kids had the consent forms and all the things that were taken care of. And we could tell how clever she was. But she was, there's a northern suburbs accent that people like to joke about. Yep. And she was, she speaks in the northern suburbs accent. So she had been going through this process with a job provider for years by this stage and had not been really given any employment and had been telling me about how it was impacting on her, how she felt like it was just making her anxious and that there was no point to it. And she described it to me, but I hadn't seen for myself yet what had happened. So I go with her to an appointment at the job provider because I wanted to see if there was a way that this work she was doing with us as a volunteer could be counted as part of her work for her job provider. And when I walked into the first job provider and that I said, I'm here for an appointment and this is about this person. And they said, no, she's not one of our clients. She might be in one of the ones down the road. So the first one was quite bright and colourful and there were people who were being helped around computers and things like that. So I walked to the next one down the road and it was a little bit more stark. And I realised that one was for people who were a bit more long-term unemployed. It wasn't as bright as the other one. It was a bit more kind of basic equipment. Anyway, that still wasn't the right one. They said, no, there's another one down the road. So I go down there and Danielle, it was one of the most depressing buildings I've ever walked into in my life. Like none of the furniture was matching. They had, really the least amount of resourcing that I've ever kind of come across in terms of a service of this kind. And I walked in and she was sitting at a desk with a copy of the white pages. Remembering this is 3 years ago.
Wow.
The white pages.
Yeah. I didn't even know that still existed. I mean, I used it wrapped in gaffer tape as a chair booster for my first, but she's like 18. So that was the last time I saw a white pages.
I hadn't seen one either. And these days, because nobody uses them, they're not very thick, but they're still, the white pages is personal phone numbers. It is not businesses. But she sat there with a copy of the white pages and her job for that day was to ring random numbers in the white pages and ask for a job.
What?
Yeah. That was what she'd been asked to do by her job provider. And so at that point I thought, I can't sit by and watch this. So I asked them that day, what can I do to employ her? They thought I was joking. I wasn't joking, but they thought I was joking. So I walked out of that office and I remember ringing my mum and said, I have to do this. Like I have to figure out how to do something about this because it was so humiliating and obviously was not going to end up being the job. The other thing that happened around the same time was that another mum friend of mine we had kids at school together, was a lovely, lovely woman who was clearly very, very intelligent. Now, she had signed up with a job provider when her youngest child was about to start school because she knew she had a period of time before she needed to be working and she thought, I've just finished my university degree with a 6.0 GPA. I'm a Golden Key Society member. I'm going to sign up for a job provider and get some help so I can go and get a job. What happened to her over the next kind of 18 months or so was that she, instead of being sent out for the kinds of jobs that she could do with her, I don't even think it was just a degree, I think it was an honours degree in linguistics, she was sent to do things like work in a cafe or be a cleaner. And she had the capacity to do an enormous amount of things. She was clearly very intelligent and she had restrictions around the number of hours that she could work because of the complexity that she'd experienced.
Right.
But again, she needed something that was flexible, but also she was a Golden Key Society member. She was one of the smartest people in our society.
Yeah.
And over that time, I just saw her confidence go down from being somebody who was really enthusiastic about going to work to somebody who was really feeling very tormented by this process. And she'd entered it voluntarily. She didn't have to be there. So she was actually the one who
And so these systems are supposed to build participation, and it sounds to me like in your experience they radically reduce the confidence, which leads to the perverse reverse outcomes that the whole system is set up for.
Yeah, absolutely. So they had entered into these systems confident, wanting employment, wanting further study in some cases, wanting to be able to skill up in, one of them wanted to go into electronics, which is so desperately needed, and instead came out feeling really anxious and really like the world of work was not for them. Now, there's been a lot of work, obviously, just in the last couple of weeks, there's been major changes announced. So I'm hopeful that this is going to start changing at a systems level. But certainly for me, on a personal level, seeing this, I couldn't do nothing. And
no, so then you're like, well, I'll just fix it myself. Like you
that's right.
decided to create a working environment where women with these types of experience could do the work that you do.
Yeah, that's right.
Why did you do that? How did you do that? What was that?
So I mean, you just wake up one day and you're like, well, nothing's changing. I'm just going to go change it, right?
Sure.
So, yeah.
You could have started a podcast, but you decided to do something more useful instead.
No, well, I couldn't figure out how to do a podcast, Danielle. Otherwise I would have done that. This was a little bit more in my wheelhouse. So, my background has been very much working with women who have experienced bullying. Within the public sector, I've had some really amazing opportunities where my job was to go into teams of women who had experienced bullying, often in a workplace setting, and to be able to work with them to really bring them back to life. So I did this a number of times. I've worked for the Office for Women. I've worked with volunteers and with clients there's me using the word client citizens at the Office for Women who were dealing with really big amounts of complexity. So people who were homeless, people who had experienced domestic violence, who had experienced significant amounts of childhood trauma. So that was an area that was already a skill that I knew I had. And then I was working with Dr. Ali Elder, who had done so much work around domestic violence. She did her PhD on cleaners and looking at the working rights of cleaners. And then she had gone over to the city of Playford. That's where I met her when we were both working there. And she was the one who did the work that found out that the success for young people growing up in the city of Playford was participation in arts, volunteering, sport, and having one person to believe in you. So we decided that with our skill set, we had a pretty good chance of cracking this, and we wanted to give it a go. Wow. And so we thought we've got nothing to lose. We actually put our rates up a little bit for the professional work that we were doing so that we could incorporate the cost of employing these women in the program that we were running. And we decided to just go for it.
What were you setting out to, I suppose, to test?
So we had a hunch. So in co-design, they like to talk about hunches, right? So we had a hunch. We had a hunch that they were really clever. We knew that capability was distributed equally amongst postcodes and that equality of opportunity was not. And we knew that we had these skills about being able to work in a trauma-informed environment. We had a particular understanding about the impact of domestic violence. And we had a hunch that if there was an opportunity of being able to do something good that was going to create a better outcome, that we would be able to do it. We also were just frustrated that we hadn't seen any change. It was just sheer determination, really, of something's got to get better. We're going to give it a go.
So you've described treating people as intellectual equals and giving them the same mentoring you would give someone in a public service role at the level you believed they were capable of working at. What did that actually like? Awesome. I'd like to see a report written like that. But what does that look like in real life?
Yeah. So in real life, what that looks like is for one of them, we got them to work alongside Ali as almost like a assistant to somebody with a doctorate. Like that's very much what they were doing. And they co-designed a survey on extracurricular activities and the impact on young people. So we got them to work with Ali to do that work. She provided them with feedback exactly as they would if they were working alongside her in a public sector role. So she's worked with some pretty cool people who are doing some really cool things right now. She just treated them exactly as she would in that role. Like it was just that they were part-time. And otherwise, for all intents and purposes, she treated them the same. And as a result of that, like their work was amazing. One of the things that we got to understand a lot better, though, was the impact of trauma. And so what that meant was that the way we did it was different in that we intentionally had to manage for trauma. So the impact of that starts to look like making sure that when we're providing feedback that we are taking responsibility to provide good quality feedback in a timely manner, to reinforce positive messaging, to understand the impact of particularly educational trauma and how that might manifest itself in a workflow. So it was really us having to change our approach, not in terms of the content of the work. The content of the work was fine. It was about understanding those psychological factors that might mean that somebody feels less confident about doing the work. The other one was much harder in many ways for me because I didn't know if my skills as a manager were going to meet the challenge. I was quite terrified. And the reason being that I've worked with a lot of people who were quite challenging to work with. I think we all do.
Yeah.
But this was trauma-based challenge that meant that we would see things like highly inappropriate language at times, rehashing of stories around domestic violence in an office environment, really things that, that's when we talk about soft skills.
Yeah.
That was the area that required the most amount of work. And what's been really rewarding is that through this, so I started off petrified, and I said to this amazing woman that we're working with, I said, I'm a bit scared about how to do this. Like, if I need to give you feedback, how do I do that? And she said to me, Georgia, you know what Northern Suburbs women are like. You just tell me directly. All right. And so off we went. And so I told her directly. I'm like, you can't say that. That is racist. You can't say that. That is, we've got other people. And pretty quickly we went from not knowing where we were going to go, not knowing how successful this was going to be, to a point where she's made an entire website on her own and is now writing blog articles on her own that are really high quality. And as we unpacked it, this was one of the biggest challenges that I've had in terms of my skill set. And as we unpacked it, I realized all these assumptions that I was making about, what was her writing going to be like? What was her ability to be able to be in a meeting going to be like? What I discovered was that her writing was really good. And so I started to unpack that a bit more. I'm like, tell me more about your schooling. And there's a huge amount of educational trauma that we continue to need to work through here. But what I discovered was her mother was actually an English teacher. And so she's been experiencing these systems. Nobody's ever stopped to say, like, hey, what did your parents do? Because they never, ever would have known. I didn't know. Her mother was an English teacher. And so her skills have been really high. It's the soft skills that we've needed to work on, and obviously that trauma. And that continues to be a big part of the work that we do. But, our experience has been that we have some of the most reliable, hardworking, well-written people that I've ever had the privilege of working with.
Yeah. So you kind of designed the environment a bit differently. What surprised you most about what people were capable of? Aside from the making of an assumption that because your verbal skills and or your kind of soft skills were not office appropriate, making that second leap that your writing would be too. Stepping back further from an individual, once you designed the environment differently, what surprised you the most about what was possible?
It's a resilience.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the kinds of things that so the quality of the work, things like the website and the blog posts and being able to do that kind of work, I always knew that, like, deep in my heart, I always knew that would be possible. And I guess that comes back to that experience of we were in the same year 8 class together. So I knew what she could do.
We started at the same spot. Yeah.
Yeah. What has astounded me through this experience is looking at people who will turn up for work and do their best no matter what the world is flinging at them. Yeah. And I think the things that are being flung at them are things that people would, certainly for me, I don't think I could function if I was experiencing the things that these amazing women are experiencing. So for example, in the course of this employment, people have been evicted from their house 3 times. We've had people have major health diagnoses. We've had several grandchildren being born, child protection involvement in that process. We've had children who have been not just charged for offences, but publicly national news charged for offences, and they still keep turning up to work. They still keep doing the quality of the work, and they still keep striving to do even better so that they can make an outcome that is different for their children and now for their grandchildren.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm with you. Who turns up to work after some of that? When you were working through that, you have mentioned that one of the big kind of learnings is being the level of perfectionism people brought into the office. Much of it, and you've mentioned educational trauma a couple of times. I'd love to find out what that means. I think I can guess, but I'd like to kind of know what it means, because if we are going to improve this, and we've got lots of big employers in our listeners, then what are they looking for? What is the perfectionism that you have when you've had educational trauma, and what is educational trauma?
Yeah, so what I'm seeing it as is probably 2 main things. Firstly, a reluctance to show written work, and that is something that for most people can be a little bit of a challenge. If you've come from an environment where you've had educational trauma and childhood trauma, then showing your work is so vulnerable. And the way in which you do that, even if that work is brilliant, even if you've got a 6.0 GPA, it can be terrifying.
Yeah.
So understanding the impact of written work for people, understanding our role as managers of providing good quality, timely feedback, and understanding our role of being the positive reminder of telling people over and over and over again that they're doing a good job. That costs us nothing and is a huge part of both keeping people within the workplace and then seeing them thrive.
Yeah.
I think the other thing is that when we're talking about having people come into the office with that level of perfectionism, my experience so far has been that the expectation of what a workforce, particularly white-collar workforce, will be like is so much higher, that it's been built up so much more than what I would think is what the realities of the public sector, or what the realities of white-collar workforces are. And what I mean by that is, so when you go to work, you'll rock up. Most people rock up, they'll have a cup of coffee, they'll talk to people, do a bit of work, go to a team meeting. You might have some time waiting for people to rock up, so you're having a bit of a chat. You might have a water cooler conversation, right? And then you go and you have your lunch break, and so your day has these ebbs and flows where it's really, really busy, and then other periods where it's a bit quieter. If you are coming from that kind of background where you haven't done it before and where there is this trauma that comes with it, what we're seeing is that people feel like they have to be on all the time. Now, that's completely unreal.
It's exhausting, right?
It's exhausting. Absolutely. And that if you slip even just a little bit, you've built yourself up to be able to get to this point to show everyone that you can do it. So if you slip even just a tiny bit, then that might let everyone know that you're a fraud, or that might make people think you're lazy. So having that reality setting of what is a white-collar workplace like, what is reasonable to expect, and no, it's not having to be on all day, every day, without a break. It is, things like sick leave. So we've intentionally made our employment practices to be inclusive of sick leave and family leave, etc. So we're making sure that people have adequate leave. But nobody wants to take sick leave because it's not, we're talking about working class backgrounds where people think that you go to work and you get paid for that day. And if you don't go to work, you might not get paid.
Right.
So
we haven't made it clear how the employment arrangements work.
That's right. And even if we have made it clear, the trust, we're talking about people who've come from that job seeker background. We're talking about people who've experienced childhood trauma, domestic violence, etc. The trust that if you take a day of sick leave that you'll actually, that's okay. You know, we're coming from a very low trusting environment with government services. Yeah. So we actually have to do that work to build up the trust that if we say we're going to do something, we're going to do something. And that you're not going to be penalised by doing the things that the majority of the public service will take for granted, like taking a day sick leave.
There are lots of hidden rules of professional work. And look, I'm finding this just as the mother of an 18-year-old who's at uni but also working in a professional environment, that the number of times she will ask, like she'll be sick and she will be calling in sick, but she'll say, what do I put in the text message? Or such and such happened. So like asking the questions. And they are the hidden, and sometimes her suggestions are, from my mind, a bit offbeat or not the ones. And I'm like, no, love, what we do is this, like that, this is how it's done. And she's like, oh, okay. And every time I do it, I'm acutely aware, because I'm obsessed with this and because I know that you have been, where I'm like, what would be the fallout or the next steps of that had she sent her really informal such and such or whatever else, and what would that mean for progress? And if you don't have someone to ask, what are the words I put in my calling in sick text message? Or I have a doctor's appointment. It's taken a long time to get the doctor's appointment and it's in the middle of my work day. Mum, what are my options? And it's that real thing of like, okay, well, can you do it on telehealth and just ask to step out because, you know, might take 6 months to get the appointment. It usually only takes 10 minutes once you're on the phone kind of thing. But all of these kind of practical, what's okay to do, what's not okay to do, even just as I said, through the process of providing this to, like, answering these questions with my own daughter, like, I realise how hidden some of them are and how opaque some of them are. What should managers know about those hidden rules? Like, should we be more, I take the trust part. I understand that just saying that leave works like this isn't enough if you don't trust that system. But is it about really explicit kind of communication about what is possible and not possible, and what is appropriate and not appropriate? Like, what could managers understand about the secret parts of working in a white-collar environment?
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And I think it goes back to, you know, what that line about just tell them directly. Yeah. You know, the clearer we make things, the easier it is for everybody. And if we are very clear about what the rules, what the processes are, and, you know, and to use examples about that, then I think it makes it better for everybody. I don't think the people that I'm working with aren't asking for anything extra. They're not asking for extra flexibility, or if anything, they're actually trying to fit their highly complex lives into something that is kind of a cookie cutter. Everyone's supposed to fit into it. So they're not asking for anything extra. And I think as managers, you know, we've got an opportunity to get to know people a little bit better, to understand what is going on that is going to impact on their work, and to help to guide them to be able to be their most productive self. And the clearer we are and the fairer we are of having those rules, then the better conversations we can be having. So if we've got rules, you know, that we can be very, very clear about, but then conversations that can be more nuanced, if that makes sense.
Makes perfect sense. So we talk a lot about co-design and lived experience, right? It's what we do. It's what we do now. What are we getting right about that, and what are we getting wrong about it? Because I'm not sure that I'm seeing the kind of results. Like, co-design and improving lived experience is supposed to make services, policies, rules, legislation less stupid, quite frankly. So less the gap between level 16 of this building and life. Mm-hmm. Like, for me, the reason we talk about doing co-design and lived experience is to close that gap so that what we're designing lands better in the real world. Is it working? And kind of, if not, why not?
So I think that there are some really good examples. Like we were talking before about the ear health. I think that's a really good example of where co-design has made a really big impact. You know, if you put co-design together with good process and process improvement, so bring that factory thinking in, you can get some really good outcomes. I think I share your critique of co-design. And I do it because I know I'm guilty of having these big conversations about co-design and then accidentally forgetting to invite or to pay attention to the people with the lived experience. And I'm not seeing them as necessarily equal partners in that journey.
Yeah.
For sure, that is something I've done. And I think, one of the things that I have done in my career is work on a great project that was called the Stretton Centre, which was all about the ideas of Professor Hugh Stretton, who was a public intellectual, very involved in the South Australian Housing Trust. He wrote ideas for Australian cities, and we spent millions of dollars and several years of work coming up with these great ideas to bring together the community, the public sector, industry, and academia to co-design solutions to intergenerational unemployment. And it was great. We had a great time. Forgot completely to invite anyone from community to any of those conversations. We just didn't do it. And I think worse than that for me was I got to the end of it, and this is a building out in the northern suburbs, and I realised that I had not even seen myself as part of that community. And of course I am. That's where I grew up. That is my community. Yeah. And so we're making this mistake of, we've got lots of really well-intentioned thoughts about how to do it. We spend lots of time sitting around tables discussing why it's important. I talk a lot about living labs as well. And then we just forget the last bit. But I think, Ali and I talk a lot about this in our work, that it's really hard, and I don't think anyone knows how to do it. And so that's where our work is really starting to head into this space of how do we genuinely create this equality between ordinary community members and people who run these roles of authority. And she talks about it not just from a public sector perspective, but also an academic perspective. And it's, academics will come into these co-design processes or living lab processes, and they have worked years to be able to get their PhD. So they've got skin in the game about, I am the expert. And then all of a sudden we come in, we say, well, sorry, you're not the expert. That person from Davern Park is. And, there's a lot of work that we have to do to be able to understand our role in that and to be able to bring ourselves down from our pedestals to be able to work collaboratively as genuine partners.
Yeah. Yeah. But we often, I think, ask people to tell their story as a part of both co-design and lived experience. What's the gap between that and supporting people to be the actual designer, writer, analyst, or leader? So we set up lived experience reference groups, and we come and present the new direction for such and such and seek views. Seems to me like your life's work is about not doing that, but that there's massive limitations to that, and having the people in that lived experience reference group become the designer and the policy maker and the leader. Have I got that right first? Is that what you're wanting to do? But also, what is the gap between that? What are the limitations on saying, here's our new thing, you have lived experience of being this type of person, what do you think of it? What are the limitations on that compared to the limitations on supporting that reference group to, instead of that, become a part of the team?
Yeah, so I do live in this space, and when we think about the IAP2 spectrum, so we talk about inform and consult. I'm in the empower. I live in empower, and that's a different place to be, but it's the place that I love, and it does come with challenge because it's, empower can be scary. Empower is about giving up power, and empower, it's about saying that we are not always going to be the experts. We don't have all the answers. One of the things that then comes with that is we say, okay, well, if we're going to have people working as equals, how do we pay people? So if you're a lived experience reference group person, you're not getting paid for your expertise in the same way that you might be if you're working as, somebody in the public sector or in academia. So how do we value and remunerate the skills that people bring to the table as part of that process? And then how do we give genuine power to design systems better? And that, part of that is being able to uncode the public sector lingo. So we we have so many acronyms,
Yeah.
When we're using acronyms, we are excluding people. When we are talking about, and we do a lot of work with the women that we work with about saying to them, learn this, learn how to be able to hold your own in a public sector meeting. Like that's a goal we want. We want you to be able to hold your own and never ever lose your own voice, because it is as important to be able to call things out and to say, that's never going to work, as it is to be able to, have the nuance and the words of public sector, fluff.
It's a fine balance between, you can't get anywhere if you can't speak the language of the place, the country you're in. In this way, that country is a public service. And I notice it in particular pockets that everyone sounds exactly the same. Not just the lingo, almost the accent, the tone, I don't know, like a bunch of public sector robots. And not everywhere, but sometimes I go places where I'm like, halfway through the day, I think, what is it that's bugging me? And I'm like, oh my God, it's not so much that everyone is all white or all appear quite kind of well educated. It's actually that you are all talking exactly the same.
Absolutely. And when we think about that, like if you want to be promoted in, not just in the public sector, in any role, then you have to impress the people who are going to be promoting 100%. You. So if somebody, so you're going to want to agree with them. So you're going to go in there and you're going to nod and you're going to say the same kinds of things. But like, I don't know, Danielle, I know for sure I've been in these meetings where people have been talking like that, and I've thought to myself, I'm like, I don't know what they're talking about.
Oh,
does anyone know what they're talking about?
Word salad people. I have been in plenty of things where I've been like, that person's talked for 45 minutes and I don't think I'm super dumb and I have no idea.
100%. I
don't think I'm a genius, but I don't think I'm like super dumb.
No.
And they are all English language words that as a standalone I understand, but strung together like that, no fucking idea what they're talking about. None.
Zero. No idea what they're talking about. And then you get into this like group nod, right? Like everyone's saying, yeah, absolutely. And I'd just like to, follow up with what that person said and agree that blah, blah. No, like sometimes somebody just needs to say, you guys are not making sense. Like talk properly. But, it's part of how the public sector works. It's part of how we show that we are clever and that we are worthy of promotion one day. Yeah. And unfortunately, to make an impact, sometimes we've got to put our hand up and take a risk and say, hey, I know you're way more senior than me, or I know that you're in this project, but maybe this isn't going to work.
But maybe like middle class white men and women at management and above, like who still have that experience all the time where they're like, interesting graph on that PowerPoint, person's been talking, I've lost interest, I'm now on my email, or I've got no idea what's going on here, can't understand it. Maybe it's more incumbent upon us to say, sorry, like hold up, maybe it's just me, but what are we talking about? And like can I specifically ask you about these three things, because I think we're talking about building a service on Georgia Street, but I like honestly, what's a live lab? I don't know. In order to create the kind of safe space for more junior officers in the room who are like, this is why I don't belong here, because they all seem to be nodding and understanding when it's not right? There's always another senior person who's like, I've got no idea what's going on. And maybe we need to be braver about creating that space more often for like leading the way. I don't know what you're talking about.
I totally agree. I think, one of the, as you were talking, I thought one of the best examples I've heard of this was a friend who did her graduate program in Canberra, working for what was then, I think, the Department of Employment. And they were working on a computer system where they had to figure out with job seekers what was going to happen to them afterwards. So they figured out these amazing realities for if they got sick, if they died, if they, all these things. And eventually they were brave enough as a graduate to put their hand up and say, excuse me, what if they get a job? And nobody had thought to design it.
Oh, my God.
So it's really important.
God.
I know, right? So this is really important that we have this space where people can do that. And I think the first step for me is like naming the problem. And then after that, you can go back and intentionally design it. We've all done six hat thinking, right? Like
Yeah.
these concepts are there for everybody.
Yeah.
And we understand why it's important to have the black hat. And I think maybe it's about owning it, like, really coming in and saying, we know this is valuable. We know this makes a difference. Let's intentionally create the space to speed this up. Plus, also, nobody wants to sit through that meeting. It's boring.
Oh, it's so boring. And I have less tolerance for it than I had before. Part of being on the outside, I'm like, why am I still in this room?
Same.
But
I
even
count
like
up
when
the
you say,
salaries.
even when, I always count up. I do that too. I count up the salaries. I'm like, there's X million dollars in the room, and I reckon for 20
100%.
minutes, no one's had the foggiest idea what's going on.
Yeah,
but even
absolutely.
things like six hat thinking, like, I saw in my daughter is doing governmenty international relations things at uni, where it was like, what's the red line? And I was like, so interesting that she will enter the workplace knowing what red line mean. I honestly went a long time. I think also having AI and the internet makes a big difference, because when people say six hat thinking and I'm like, oh, I don't know what that is, I can now go and like find out. Whereas like that wasn't available for a lot of the time. And it, even when it became available, like not in your hand, so you would have been doing it on your work computer and worried that you were looking dumb again. Whereas like red line, like how do you explain red line? And well, of course, in that meeting, Georgia was the black hat, and you're like, again, more nodding, right? Like, black hat. I didn't see her wearing a hat. Like, I don't know what the hell you're talking about. She didn't seem to have a hat on to me. So a lot of this stuff is just pretty opaque, and like so it is in lots of places. But we can also do better at what that means is, or like, and also creating that space. Like, what's a red line? I don't know. Like, I just think the fear of looking stupid
absolutely
holds back our policy design and our departmental cultures and all sorts of things, is the fear of looking daft, basically.
And it makes sense, because if you think about it, so we've moved towards a public sector that is more graduate than ever before, right? So if you think about your process, so you go through school to get into uni, you've got to go and you've got to do really well at school, and then you go to uni, you've got to do well at uni, and you've got to learn
and
how
the
to
administration of uni, though,
That's
right? Like just
yes.
literally figuring out how to be at uni is quite a thing.
Absolutely. And you want to impress people, and then you go and you get your job, and it's always about impressing people and showing people how clever you are. So, and I think where I find this is really challenging is in plain English writing. So we've been cultured to be able to write these really complex words and to show our worth, show our credibility by having complexity. Whereas actually what we need to do is be simple. And one of the great values that I have with the work that we're doing with these women is that their ability to write simple is beautiful. It is, I would pay a huge amount of money to try and teach people how to write as well as they do in plain English. And it's a real skill. So, I spent a good part of 2024, 2025 trying to figure out how to rewrite the building code so that builders could understand what they were talking about.
Yeah.
And, there's so many big words in there. There's so many things that if you're somebody who's come out of you might not even have finished school and you've gone into the building industry and you've got to figure out how to interpret the building code. What is a sanitary compartment? It's a toilet. How do we...
And the thing about plainness is that we don't have added value. If it changes the meaning, it's fine. But if we are calling it a sanitary compartment instead of the most widely known terminology for that being a toilet, it serves no purpose except to exclude. Sometimes It's because we're trying to describe a form of nuance that the bigger words help us with. But sometimes it's a search and replace where like we could just use the word everyone knows. It's like Latin, right? Like it's literally like we wanted religion to be inaccessible, and then the law, and then medicine. We wanted them to be inaccessible. We thought, what's the best way to do that? Well, we'll do it in a completely dead language. And then instead of saying your knee, we'll use the Latin for it, and then that'll make us feel kind of exclusive and smarter. There is value in some of the different words, but there is often absolutely no value in calling it a sanitary compartment.
Absolutely. And it is just so important that we make, particularly for government, we make things understandable. So whether we're talking about how to make employment easier for people, how to make meetings easier for people, or make, what we put up on our fact sheets or our website easier for people. It's all part of the same continuum of making government more accessible and ultimately getting better results.
And then increase trust in government, because it doesn't feel like you are trying to talk at me in a different language, and we protect the institutions that we hold so dearly. I'm going to need to start wrapping up because Caroline's not here to stop me, and this could just go for 3 hours and I'll be in trouble. So we might just have to get you back on like the lived experience of working in some of these systems. But we've got secretaries and chief executives and a lot of executive listeners. What do you want them to do differently next week?
The number one thing I want them to do differently is to look at their non-university pathways to employment. So to go and have a look, is there an opportunity for a traineeship? Is there opportunity, are they providing work experience? Are they finding non-university pathways?
Yeah.
And the second thing then would be to go down and find out who's working on your front line, who's clever.
Yeah.
And to just mentor them. My career has been benefited so much by people who have identified that I have something to say and then putting me into a room and at a table to say it.
Yeah.
And there is so much power in that.
Yeah.
There's so many people that would be sitting in the lunchrooms of those service areas who have good things to say that is going to make our country better.
Yeah.
If we just find them and put them at the right tables with the right mentoring and support, we can start to make a big difference in terms of the outcomes that Australians face.
Yeah. What still makes you angry?
Pace of change. I want to see things changing faster. I want to see, I'm out here in Mapoon and I know that as a country we've done a huge amount of work around educational outcomes. I know that there are public servants all over our country trying to change childhood disadvantage, try and change the health outcomes. And we just haven't figured out yet how to do that last bit of work to actually deliver it on the ground.
And for every moment that we're slow, that's a year is a long time in a kid's life in particular. A year in my life seems to not change a great deal, but a year in a 3-year-old in Mapoon's life is a very long time. So if we are too slow, we miss more groups and generations of kids.
That's it.
What still gives you hope?
I think it's conversations like this, and to know that, all around Australia, there are people who are absolutely doing that work, who are on the front line, who are in policy roles, who are going out and giving their best to try and change the outcomes. And no matter how hard things get, no matter how terrible those meetings are that don't seem to make sense, people are still going and doing that work every day, doing their bit to incrementally move us forward. I had a phone call yesterday from 3 of my mum friends in Mount Isa who work in domestic violence, addiction, and for the hospital. And they were just calling me on their Sunday to tell me about their vision for how they can make the lives better for children in the northwest of Queensland. There are great people all over Australia doing this work in every community. And that's what gives me great faith that we're going to keep going and we are going to make a real difference to the next generation.
That feels like a hopeful spot to finish up. Georgia, thank you for battling roads, post offices that open on the days of their own choosing in order to collect your headphones and mic, unreliable infrastructure in order to come on the pod today. But also thank you for the work that you do. I really value your service, and I really value you continuing to talk about it, particularly talking about it on LinkedIn, where the people who need to hear it and see it will see the benefits of the work that you do. And I suppose I just want another 50 or 60 Georgias running around doing similar things. So this week's mug winner for the Westminster Tradition mug is Georgia Heath for taking time and coming and talking to us today about what we need to think about and do better in making sure that the public service looks like the people that it serves. Till next time.
Just some appropriately bureaucratic disclaimers. While we've tried to be as thorough in our research as busy full-time jobs and lives allow, we definitely don't guarantee that we've got all the details right. Please feel free to email us corrections, episode suggestions or anything else at thewestminstertraditionpod@gmail.com. Thanks to Pampot Audio for our intro and outro music. Till next time.